Hi, this is Trent Clark, CEO of Leadershipity, serial entrepreneur, international speaker, longtime coach in professional baseball coaching in 3 World Series. And today on the Winners Find a Way show, I welcome my good friend, Gordie Bufton. Hey, Gordie.
What is going on, Trent? Good to see you.
So much going on this Labor Day weekend. It's exciting. I'm thrilled to see you as well, my man. It's been a long time since I've seen you personally, but we talk a lot, right? Like we get a chance to talk, but we are on different angles of the world all the time. And we're going to hear a little bit about how you spent your whole COVID time in Europe. And we're going to hear that. So let's get into this a little bit. For the show, you're joining the show for the first time. Winners find a way. Have you ever faced stiff adversity, felt like the losses are mounting, and you need to find a better way? Well, I think you came to the right place, whether you are already an entrepreneur, an athlete, business leader, or just looking to start your journey to being elite. This is the perfect show for you, the perfect podcast. I'm so thankful you're with us, and you're going to definitely enjoy Gordie Bufton. And there will be a time for ask questions. You can ask questions in the chat. We will get to that on the back side, and I will try to get to your questions, and we may answer them via text. So here's a few highlights I jotted down about Gordie. Before I do that, Gordie, tell them where they can find you on social media. How can they get a hold of Gordie Bufton?
Oh, social, my favorite. So Gordon, Gordon, Bufton at most of the platforms. The best is probably LinkedIn, just Gordon Bufton, and then Instagram is Gordon Bufton 8. And then if you want to send me an email, it's gb@geniuscreators.org.
Genius Creators. So it's geniuscreators.org and gordiebufton.com, both your websites, correct?
I'm switching from Gordie Bufton to gordonbufton.com.
Okay.
But most of the stuff will be on Genius Creators.
Man, all right. We're maturing from Gordie to Gordon. I like that. You're going formal on me. I like it.
I know. It's been a while since we met in Thailand. What was that, 2016 at an EO conference?
5 years ago. Isn't that amazing? Yeah, I think actually we met in Greece first. We were in, I think we were in Athens, right? When we first met?
No, the first time we met was in Thailand. I hadn't been to it. I only went to Athens during COVID.
That's funny. All right. So, wow, that's funny because in my mind,
could have been my avatar or my twin.
Yeah. No. So let's talk a little bit about meet Gordie Bufton, award-winning international speaker, spoken around the world, high demand within the EO, YPO community. That's the Entrepreneur Organization, Young Presidents Organization, specializing in helping people connect what is essential in their lives. He's passionate about wellness and healthcare. Been featured on CBS, NBC, Forbes, countless more. Resides currently in Peru, which I love. You're a former collegiate golfer. You're a facilitator of many forum groups with Genius Creators. You were a key man in COO Alliance, a good group there. And you've been a keynote international speaker. You're a former drug dealer. And that's right, you heard it right. He's a former drug dealer. And that's Gordie's gig in a nutshell. But Gordie, let's start there. Say hello and tell them, Gordie, when I say, hey, I'm your buddy, we're friends, and you know me on the speaking circuit, but why would you come on a show like this, Winners Find a Way, talking about some of the challenges you faced and how you overcame them?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Trent. I always appreciate our friendship and how much passion that you have for helping entrepreneurs and others and really empowering leaders. I come on a show like this to, as I say at every speech, if I just impact one person during the speech, it's worthwhile. Because a lot of the reason why I do what I do is I don't want others to have to experience what I went through. As you mentioned, I was a drug dealer. Not the proudest thing, but that's how, my entrepreneur journey, I wouldn't say started there, but that really I was like, I can't be using all these drugs and not making money or like just having money out the door. So that's really how I was funding my habit for many years.
Yeah. Sure. No, I think it's I think when we look back at some of the things we did, I'm actually surprised I didn't transition to that. I had like a paper route. I worked at a carpet store, cutting carpet and delivering carpet. I worked in restaurants, and I thought, like, man, drug dealers actually much more lucrative. As I was making money, and I thought, like, and there was always that balance of ethics. Fortunately, maybe, unfortunately, I'm not sure. Fortunately, I wasn't a user, right? So, like, and I always heard, like, hey, if you're going to be a drug dealer, don't be a user, because you can't end up, killing your own inventory and your product, right? So that was like rule number one of that business, is what I heard. And of course, I don't know if there are any rules in that business.
Well, rule number one, don't get arrested.
Yeah, right. You are an illegal activity, right?
And rule number two, don't use the product. I wasn't successful. I was fairly successful on rule number one for a while until I wasn't successful.
Right.
But the good news is when I got arrested. So, and this kind of goes back to some of the other things that we'll talk about during our discussion, but like, I firmly believe you're the average of the 5 closest people you spend the most time with. And, if you're hanging out with billionaires, or you're hanging out with, at the time I was hanging out with druggies, and I was the only one out of my entire peer group that hadn't been arrested. Like, every single one of my friends had been arrested. So sure enough, I thought I was invincible, but I ended up getting arrested and spending my 20th birthday in jail, which was, at the time, I thought horrible, but in retrospect, the best birthday present I ever got, as it really inspired me to change my life.
Gordie, if I talk to people around the world, and you and I both talk to a lot, right? There are many successful people that have been arrested between 16 and 21. I cannot tell you how many world beaters I meet who are like, oh yeah, I got arrested like twice for this or that, or monkeying around, and I mean, it's funny because these kids now, they record everything on their video. And I laugh because I was speaking at an event, and one of my high school baseball teammates showed up at the event, now 20 years later, right? And I was telling him the struggle of these phones with these kids, my children, and me too, really. And I said, blessing and a curse. And I go, can you imagine us with these phones? And he'd like, oh yeah, we'd be in jail. And I'm like, oh, that's right. Like, yeah, we would be. Someone taping us at a B&E at the church so we can go play basketball because we're breaking and entering into the church, right? Like, I mean, it's bonkers, the silly stuff, right? But yet we did that, and now there's incriminating video evidence, right?
Yeah, no, I'm grateful. I remember a situation, I was like probably 18, 19, and cell phone cameras were like just starting, and I was with some friends, and we were smoking a joint, and one of them was like trying to take a picture, and I'm like, no, like, I don't want photo evidence of this. And I remember like having the joint and trying to hide it, and I feel like there was one photo, but like you couldn't really tell. But now, I've worked with a lot of students and college students. It's like, it's incredible the stuff that they're filming, and it's getting out, and then there's the things going viral, and like the parties, and
yes,
I'm grateful I got out of that world.
Yeah,
when I did.
Yeah, and it's so true. I'm actually shocked at what people put. And by the way, not without repercussions. We had a young gentleman from our gym. I used to own a gym in Chicago, and he was a great athlete, and he'd been doing some things out of character for sure. And he had a full ride scholarship to a Big Ten school, and the coach got a hold of his Instagram account or something, one of the social medias, and he posted something, and sure enough, they called him and said, hey, listen, we're looking for a little bit better character than this. We're rescinding our offer. And I was like, wow. Like, I was full support of it. I don't know how many times that there's a danger in putting your whole life out there. And then here it just resonated with all these athletes. And it's a terrible and unfortunate lesson, but one that was so impactful for all kids that were around trying for that opportunity to, like yourself, be a collegiate athlete, right?
Yeah, and this reminds me of a story. I was just about to go to college, and I get a phone call from the golf coach, and he goes, "Gordie, I know you're coming in next week. You're going to be a freshman. Da da da. We need you to go take a physical." And as soon as I heard this, I'm like, "Oh man, that means I need to stop smoking pot." Like, they might drug test me, and obviously NCAA. And those policies. And I remember my dad looking at me going, "You know what this means?" And I'm like, "Yep." And so I stopped smoking pot for about like the week before I went to college. And I remember we were in, like, all the athletes were getting a physical at a similar time. And they're like handing us bottles to go pee in. And like, I'm freaking out, right? And one of the basketball players, he looks at me and he's like, "Don't worry, it's not for drugs. It's just to see if you're hydrated or not." And then, so they hand me this, and I had to do the blood test for my blood pressure. And like, my blood pressure was totally through the roof. And they're like, "Oh man, what's wrong with this kid?" So just because, I thought I might lose my scholarship from the drug perspective.
Oh my God. And immediately, right, that anxiety, let's dive into that a little bit, right? Because when you talk about those impactful moments, I think all of us have had a moment of crossing the line of what we know to be right. And we cross it, and we run around and take a risk on this area, and there's anxiety with it, right? And we start, and like, it snowballs into lying to people about where we were, what we were doing, and cover-ups, and it's not long before this thing is a spinning tornado, right? And every time there's a chance that gig is up, it's anxiety, it's stress, it's high blood pressure. I mean, it's no way to live, right?
Yeah, I don't know. A lot of people do.
Yeah.
Still, and like you said, it is one of those things that you do one thing, and then like the next thing doesn't seem so bad, and the next thing doesn't seem so bad, and the next thing doesn't seem so bad. But one of the things that we're always talking about is those core values, and it is easy to create the story of what I'm doing isn't that bad, and like. Mm-hmm. Oh, well, it's not as bad as Pablo Escobar. Like, it's just a couple of pounds.
I don't have that many kilos.
You're right. And, or in some of the entrepreneur circles that we run in, right? Like the white collar crime of, whether it's tax evasion or this or that. And, it's easy to look at, well, someone else has done more. And someone else has done some things differently. But we really have to check in with, hey, is it worth like the aggravation of going to sleep at night knowing my door might get busted in? And for me, that would occasionally happen. Back in those years, and now do I still? So one of the things I work with a lot of my clients, like, depression is when you're stuck in the past, and anxiety is when you're afraid of the future. And so obviously the goal is to be in the now. Yet it is easy to get in that anxiety and like what's happening or what's going on, and be concerned. Like, I'll admit, like, I was like, how's this conversation going to go? I mean, I know Trent, like, is how are we going to make the most use for your subscribers, right? And your followers. How do we make the most value for them? Just in preparation for this call, even though I hadn't done anything illegal.
Right. Well, I think that's so, like, that's a great statement. I never really had considered it, but like, depression, past, anxiety, future, because we know people, and I have close family members that everyone we've heard this statement. Oh, that person's such a worry wart, right? They're constant worry, and so it's about what might happen, right? And yeah, I mean, I love the Twain line, right? Mark Twain, where he said, I spent 90% of my life worrying about things that never happened, right? And I want to pivot this a little bit. I want to come back to this, of course, but I want to pivot this Tell us the most impactful pivot point you had as a young person when you knew you were destined for something like the greatness you're doing now, the Genius Creators Forums. You've been working with COOs all over the world, helping them get better. You've been all over the world training people up for what's about to happen and the challenges they face and how to address them. Did you have a moment as a kid where you said, "Hey, I am going to be this"?
No, there's, it's a good question. I think the moment, I write about this I wrote about this in my latest book, The Connection Effect. I think early on, I don't know, I've done 2 books and sometimes they morph into each other. But there is a, nature. Yeah. So I write about it in the Nature of the Mind chapter of, I was at the Ritz-Carlton spa in Naples, Florida. I've just spent my 20th birthday in jail, a couple weeks earlier. I just got jumped in Macon, Georgia. I had a brick repeatedly smashed in the back of my head. And this guy was picking me up from behind and throwing me on the cement. And I remember going, if I get knocked unconscious, I'm going to be dead. And I got knocked unconscious for about a second, and my life flashed before my eyes, and I quickly came to, and ended up not dying and spending the night in the hospital with, broken wrist, 12 stitches in the back of my head. And so then I'd spent a couple nights homeless in Naples. It was just 3 weeks of absolute misery, fueled by my drug addiction. And I remember sitting in the Ritz-Carlton spa going, okay, I could either continue down this path that I've been going, which will land me back in jail or dead, or I could get sober. And 99% of me, Trent, was I can figure this out. This isn't that bad. I can put my stuff back together. And then there was that 1%. Yeah, right? And then there was that 1% of, in order to do what I want and, like you said, lean into that greatness, I'm going to have to make different choices. And so I remember going back home, my parents had to see me for 3 weeks, and I'm like, all right, I'm going to put my life back together. And they were here's how you're going to do recovery. And I was like, I can't handle this. And I called a buddy and went and lived at his house for a couple of months and, started to put my life back together. And then I would like to say it was all rainbows and gumdrops, but it was not. And then I started to go in and out of psych wards for the mental health damage that I'd done during all my drug usage. And this goes back to, I'll pull this back to the college piece, having that golf scholarship. And then when golf season ended, I ended up getting hooked on ecstasy. So back to that call before going to college of, okay, I'm going to stop doing drugs. And then it just escalated and got worse. So, and this goes back to a perfect example of the question. It's these little choices that we make, and they could change everything about our life, right? Now, the choice would be, okay, if I smoke pot now, 11 years clean and sober, that might lead me down a completely different path, right? And I think one of my favorite books. Have you ever read The Slight Edge by Jeff Olson?
I have not.
So this is one of my favorite books. One of the most 5 impactful books I've ever read in my life, which says the small things that you do on a daily basis, compounded annually, will change your life. So everyone knows, if we just exercise for 15 minutes a day, every single day for the rest of our lives, we're going to be in decent shape.
Good shape. Pretty good shape.
Decent. And obviously the diet, you can't eat McDonald's every single day, but if you eat decent food and you move your body for 15 minutes a day, and so that's the slight edge. And it's these little decisions that we make every single day, compounded annually, that forever change our life.
I love that. Have you ever heard of the book called Success is a Choice by the basketball coach Rick Pitino?
Mm-mm.
So that was
No.
one that I think would probably put in this category. I read it as a pretty young guy. I probably read it in my late 20s. And that was kind of his
You
premise.
still
Like,
are a young guy, Trent.
oh, yeah. I'm a young 51. That's right. So success is a choice is all about, we just make choices all day. And you and I both know, being around powerhouse 1% executives most of our lives, that the decision process has gone from 15 to 25,000 decisions in the mid 80s to now well over 50,000 decisions a day. So when we talk about success as a choice, I mean, there are 50,000 plus choices you're going to make every day, from the littlest things like, am I going to have coffee? Am I going to put cream? Am I going to put this much cream in there? Like all these little things. Can I get my 15 minutes in? Am I making time for that? All those things. And there's just, and now you just think of the sheer volume of choice that we have. And it's mind-boggling to think, and it's a much bigger challenge for younger people today than I think when I was young. I'm probably a couple of generations ahead of you as an old guy, but like, I think that every layer just gets more and more choices, more and more options. And I think part of success of my generation was there's kind of like one path, and a lot of people were steering us to that. And hey, this is a way of being successes. There was less options, there was less temptation for all these choices because there weren't that many. And I think that's changed some things. What do you think about that?
Well, and this goes back to our conversation, right? Like 10 years ago, this conversation wasn't happening. Now this conversation is happening millions of times a day, put on millions of, okay, maybe not millions of different platforms, but dozens of different platforms. And that doesn't involve, well, one of the platforms is YouTube, but like, let's look at Netflix, let's look at social media, let's look at all the potential distractions that, it's kind of like when you ask me, where can you find me online, right? It's like, I write about this in the Connection Effect. I write a whole chapter on digital disconnection of how.
I love the book. I want to hear your statement here, but I want people to notice, like, this is the iris, right? Of the eye, right? And I love this cover. This is probably one of the best covers of a book I've ever seen in my life. The Connection Effect by Gordie Bufton. And Gordon, real quick, I want you to finish your sentence, and then I want you to tell us about, the premise of the connection effect.
Yeah. And so, like I was saying, there's a whole chapter about digital disconnection. And over the last 20 years, like with technology and cell phones and email and all, like nobody has really taught us how to use these technologies versus have these technologies use us. And if we look at Facebook or Instagram and, some of like they have data engineers figuring out how we spend more time on these platforms, right? And so one of like my main strategies with my cell phone is like all my apps, like I don't get notifications. Like the last thing that, or email notifications, right? It's like, if I'm doing something like this conversation, the last thing I need is my phone going off or, getting a notification and that pulls my focus, away from that, which, and this goes back to the connection effect, right? Like connection effect is a playbook to being in the present moment, right? And this is why I have the eye on the cover is like, when you're connected with someone, like the whole world could be ending, but none of that matters. And so my observation is, as a society, we've really gotten away from that. Like, when was the last time you were at a dinner with your loved one or someone that you really care about, and neither of you used your phone for that entire 90 minutes?
I mean, 90 minutes? I mean, it's been months, right? Months since that's happened.
So that, and one of the examples that I use for this is, what is more important, the person right in front of you, or that Facebook notification, or that email, or that text message? And whether it's consciously or subconsciously, we are telling the person that we're with, hey, my phone's more important.
Yeah.
And so a challenge that I have, for everyone listening is like, okay, if you're having a meal, like, turn off the phone. Like, you're not that, like, and here's another example that I use with my clients is, if you're in a board meeting and somebody wants to get a hold of you in that 90 minutes, what is your assistant going to say?
He's in a board meeting.
You're not getting.
Yeah.
He's in a board meeting. Like, the world's not going to end if you wait for 90 minutes. But so many of the entrepreneurs that I work with aren't treating their family time in a similar way.
Right.
And so what is that signaling to your spouse? What is that signaling to your kids? And how to, ultimately create that space of, hey, for 90 minutes, like, we're going to be present with each other. The TV's off, the iPads are off, the phones are off, and let's just engage.
I find it so valuable. I think it's a timely book, right? With social media just going on there. I felt like when COVID was announced and we decided essential services, I was like, hey, why don't they just deem social media non-essential and shut the whole thing down, right? Like, that would be change the world, right? Like, and I thought, like, there's a couple videos I've seen on YouTube called Look Up. And they do some statistics about our lack of presence in my world with executives. Many of us will go, hey, if you want to rate me as a listener, Gordie, you're probably thinking, I think I'm a 90, and you're telling me I'm a 60. But every time we have a conversation, I'm sitting here like, no, I'm listening to you. I just got to check this text. Like, leaders are doing this. They're doing it all day, and they're standing with this in their phone saying, I'm kind of listening to you, but I'm looking at this. And it's a laptop, it's a Surface, it's an iPad, it's a whatever. I mean, we are a distracted bunch. And so while you may be a multitasker and can really listen like that, the perception, which you and I know is reality, is that, hey, I think I'm a 90 listener. Everyone else is a 60. It says I'm a 60. So I'm a 60 listener, right? And so the first thing I've got to do with these people is like, hey, what's getting in the way of you being present? He's like, well, I don't email that much when I'm like talking to someone. Like, wait, email that much? Like, listen to ourselves speak about what we think is present, right? And the perception is you're not listening, right? You're not engaged. And we have to deal with it all the time. I mean, these are top level executives in multi-million-dollar companies, right, Gordon?
What were you saying? I wasn't listening.
I was looking at my phone.
Yeah, I had an email come in. And, and ultimately billion-dollar companies, right? And what, like, and this is ultimately part of the reason why I wrote The Connection Effect, is just a reflection. Right? If the only thing you take from this conversation is to just observe how you use technology in your interactions with others, it's been a benefit. And that's the, like I say in digital disconnection early in this conversation, like, we haven't taken a step back and go, how are we using technology versus how is technology using us? And that, how. And really thinking through. And during most of COVID, like, I've been completely off of social media. I wasn't getting, I don't know, I just needed a break. And, I think it's interesting now, like, the comparison, especially the circles that we run, like, oh, look, this person's on this private jet, or this person's at this place, or this person's at this. And like, oh, my life sucks. I'm just in Peru.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and everyone else, by the way, is saying this, like, oh, I wish I was in Peru like Gordon, like, all this. I mean, we're all just chasing the tail, right? And that envy is strong and it perpetuates under this environment, which is awful. So I like, one of the things I took away from, I think it's called social distraction, I can't remember the name
Social
of the movie.
dilemma.
Social Dilemma. Thank you.
Social dilemma.
Yeah. So in the Social Dilemma movie, we have intended consequences, just like all of us do, right? We have a goal. We have, this is my intended goal. My intended consequence of my work is I'm going to work hard and I'm going to be the best on the team. I'm going to work hard and get a scholarship. I'm going to work hard and be the next VP of sales, and there's an intended consequence. So they talk about how we all knew what the intended consequences were. What we didn't know was the unintended consequences, right? The algorithms, the addiction, the bullying, all the stuff that's going on in these social media areas of, pornography and, sexual trafficking and baiting people and all these things that were unintended, but that are happening, right? It just feels like the whole thing was just never thought through from the beginning. And now it's like, hey, how do we undo some of this, right? And I don't know if it can be undone. And one of those unintended consequences is the connection effect, right? Like that was not intended to lose connection in families. It was supposed to create connection. You can see your loved ones from hundreds of miles away. You and I are doing a talk, one of us in Detroit, Michigan, the other one's in Peru, right? I mean, like this is crazy. The connection effect can be of value and can be a success, but there's also this whole negative side of it. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, it can be amazing. We can connect with our friends from high school and have deep relationships with people while you're all around the world, right? Like 30 years ago, that wasn't possible. Right. Like, and my niece to be able to FaceTime her while I'm in Peru or like FaceTime my parents. Right. Like, so there are absolutely amazing things. We've turned into this global community, yet it also just disconnects us. Right. Like what is our core purpose of being human? And some could say it's love. Some could say it's connection. One of the things that I've really been thinking about, like for the last 5 years since, connection has been, say my word, love over the last 2,000 years has been, for lack of a better term, like used to potentially kill people. Well, I'm doing this in the name of love. Right. Yes. And, I'm serving my God and I'm doing this for love. And so, or like a parent goes to their kid, I'm only punishing you because I love you. And it's like, wait, how does that make sense? Like you're punishing me because you love me? Like, and so really the way that I look at it is I believe like the word for say the next 2,000 years is going to be connection, right? Like when you and I, Trent, are connected, we could label that as love. We could label that as joy. We could label that as whatever we want. Yet we both know when we're connected. Yeah. And that for me and like a lot of my work with entrepreneurs is we've become so connected to our work and disconnected from what makes us human, whether it's our bodies, whether it's our families, and to really reset that. And that for me, it's why I wrote The Connection Effect. And how do we and this goes back to like the question that you asked me, what was like the most pivotal moment, right? Like, because part of the connection, the main aspect is the connection that we have with ourselves, right? Like, are we doing those self-loving things? Are we journaling? Are we exercising? Are we eating well? And how, like, in order for me to connect to you, I have to be connected to myself.
I do see where people pour into everyone else and leave nothing in the cup left for themselves, right? And there's that, wow, I wonder if people know I'm struggling, but they would never show that on the outside because when they're good at connecting for others, and they've kind of left themselves out of that connection. And so their health is waning, their mental health, their moral health, their conditioning is dropping, and it's all for others. And it's alarming. And I think it's dangerous. Let me jump into the from the 4 Disciplines of Execution. Chris McChesney and Sean Covey had a quote in the book that says, "Winners, when shown data that they are losing, find a way to win." So let's take you back to a little bit of your background that allowed you to overcome, become one of the best at your craft, an author, an influencer, and all these dynamics of executive leadership and in their lives. What was there a time that you were just down, up against it, losing, but you found a way, come back and win? Down but not out. Talk to me about one of those examples. I mean, there may be a few, right, in our lives here along the way, but give me one good example for that for you.
I've always been on top, Trent. Like, come on.
Right, always. It's been easy the whole way.
Yeah, just gumbos, rainbows, and gumdrops.
Yeah.
So actually, about 2 years ago, I'm trying to see where to start this. All right, I'll start it there. About 2 years ago, had ended a very serious live-in relationship. Had managed to leave a business partnership that was very successful, and just try different things and couldn't get things to work. I was about $40,000 in debt. And I made a decision. I'm like, I'm going to sell all my stuff in Scottsdale, and I'm going to go places for the next 2 years for 90 days. And the first place that I went was Cincinnati, Ohio. So my friend's yeah, just watch my kid for a couple hours, after he gets out of school, and I come home from work, and you can live here for free. So I'm like, all right. So I didn't really have to pay rent. I was taking cash off of credit cards to pay other credit cards. So I was, I managed to get myself $40,000 in debt, and just wasn't getting the results that I wanted, and was trying to start some communities, and nothing was really taking off. So I ended up collaborating with one of my friends and running his mastermind. And in 3 months, I'd paid off all my debt. And really was one of those moments and points where it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to not have to do everything yourself, and to really lean into others. That was a very interesting experience, and allowed me to travel around the world for the last 2 years, and pay off all my debt, and have clients who are running billion-dollar companies, and other clients that are big name clients that I've been able to help their businesses grow because I made a different decision.
I love that. What do you think when you think, Gordie, about your superpower? What's the thing that separates you from others and catapults you to work with these top level folks? And what is that one thing that you think separates?
One, it's 100 things. Come on, I'm incredible. I think
I do
one
know that.
is
I
really
know that, by the way.
I almost want to say two things.
Okay.
One is to just be able to really connect with people in a deep, meaningful way, cutting across the superficial aspects. And the other piece is helping them envision a bigger future for themselves.
Okay. So let's take this first one. If I want that deep, authentic connection with people, and you can establish that quickly because you are an expert at that. What are some of the things I need to do? What are some of those things that I need to be able to do well to establish that, besides take my phone out of my hand and actually listen, eye contact, what we call that In EO, we actually do this in mentorship, right? And so we call it solar listening. So
Are there, Trent? I think it froze.
separate. Sorry about that. Did you?
Come back to life, connection, and
I'm back.
technology. All right, there we go.
Yeah, I'm back. So what are some of those things that I need to do to connect well?
Like you said, taking the phone off. And a large part is, and this goes back to Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People, is just like a genuine interest, right? And asking meaningful questions, or different questions, instead of like, hey, how was your day? What are you most excited about? Or, asking, kind of like, not necessarily like some from an employee perspective, right? It's like, hey, how can we improve? How can we get better? And I think this is a lot of leaders that I see, they don't necessarily lean on their teams to solve some of these problems. And like the teams are on the ground level, so they know some of these problems that are happening, right? So it's really just like genuinely being present and caring about people, right? And one of the questions that one of my friends gives me a hard time, it's like, instead of it's like, hey, how are you? It's like, hey, how are you, Trent? Or like, how is Trent? Right? And even just asking that question gets you to check in a little bit different. And then like, you could give me a little bit of a superficial answer. And then it's like, okay, no, really, how are you?
Yeah. I like the idea of using the name to personalize, right? Because how are you, Trent? How are you, Gordie? Like when you personalize it, because everyone says, hey, how are ya? How are ya? It doesn't feel personalized. It doesn't feel like anyone really wants to know, right? I think I've done that before where people say, hey, how are you? And I'm like, oh, well, my whole market's crashing and I'll probably be broke by 5 o'clock. Like, okay, hey, good to see you. You're like, right. Like they don't really care.
Well, and that's ultimately like, how do you ask the question a little bit differently, right? And this goes back to like how the brain works, right? Like we're just so used to the same responses, and now just like, and this goes back to the social media and all the news, like we've become numb to a lot of things. Yep. Like it's part of being human is experiencing the ups and the downs. Right? Like, and especially during COVID and kind of like mental health, and we were talking about anxiety earlier, it's like, I might be able to help you see a different perspective, right? And another aspect is like, do these people really want help? Do they want to change? Or do they want to just watch 10 hours of Netflix tonight and be okay at being addicted to that?
Yeah, another addiction, right? So let's talk about your second superpower, which is creating that stretch of a vision, like what's possible, and maybe something even like I hadn't even considered myself. Talk about like for us that want something more, and we see that our potential's out there to do some things and influence others, and we're driven for that. What are some of the things we need to be thinking about to really stretch our vision for ourselves and our teams and our organizations?
I think one aspect is really like how to just 10x. Right? Like I was talking to a client the other day, and he just found out his wife is pregnant. And so he's working, I don't know, 70, 80 hours a week in his business, and scaled very quickly from 2 years ago, no employees, to now 120 employees in 2 years. Right. And so we were like discussing, okay, how do you get your business down to 20 hours a week? Right. Yeah. So you can be present with your kid. You have basically 7 months to do this, or 6 months to do this, right? And so even that thought exercise versus like, okay, how do I go from 50 hours to 40 hours? Like, you're really not going to think differently. But if you have to basically remove yourself from your business, you're going to be thinking differently. And that's part of, building that ideal future, right? It's like, what does your ideal future look like? And this is where we work with a lot of executives, and they're like, well, I just want to spend more time with my family. And it's like, but are your actions in alignment with that?
Gordie, are you there? I think we lost you for a second.
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you now. Yes. So you said, like, I think we lost you right when you said he's got the business, like he's lying in bed thinking like, okay, how are we really going to do this? Like, you're going to have a new family, and he's already scaled like, through the roof quickly. What's the vision? What's the mindset of someone in that situation?
Yeah. So like the mindset is, how do you basically remove yourself from your business? How do you go from 80 hours a week down to 20? And when you have to think through it from that perspective, you're going to come up with drastically different solutions than how do I go from 60 to 50 hours? And what are the pieces that I can take off my schedule? And this goes back to like a lot of your work is like, what are your core values, right? Like, is your core value business ahead of family? Okay, well then, like, that's a decision. You mentioned earlier Stephen Covey. One of the stories I remember, his daughter and him, they were in San Francisco, and they had like a whole day planned, and he ran into one of his clients. His client's like, we're going to this dinner, and like, we'd love for you and your daughter to come. And Stephen's like, no. And his daughter's like, why'd you say no to that? Because I've made a promise and commitment to you that we're going to go to this adventure. And even like family is more important to me than work. And so here's an opportunity.
That's so good. Let's talk real quickly about, you've been through, a number of things. You've been through rehabilitating yourself. You've been through debt. You've been through, I'm sure, family challenges like most of us. So tell me a little bit about when things get hard for people, what's the one belief, value, or action you would recommend to others on their journey when things get hard? I mean, many of us have spent down and we've lost a job, we've lost something, and it's woe is me, and, can spend months in depression or even years in the hard times and the victimhood of it all, of what happened, and it's all somebody else. But is there something that you think, what would you recommend right away for someone to get back and regulate after a hard moment?
So for me, one of the main aspects is just mentors and calling on my support network. And it's really going back to like, what are those core principles, right? Like, what are the daily things that allow me to be successful? And part of going through these struggles is like, you don't want to journal, you don't want to exercise, you don't want to eat clean, you don't want to pick up the phone. And like we've discussed many times before, like part of it, like, what is the conversation I'm having with myself? How do I become more gentle on myself? How do I not beat myself up? How do I be more patient? And all these are things that are very easy in practice, like very easy concepts, but very difficult in practice. And so, especially when we're not feeling 100%, how do we love ourselves? And ultimately, like what we were talking about with the connection effect, how do we go back and connect? And usually from my experience, like something's off, right? Like it's a relationship, it's work, it's like there's something that I'm not willing to face.
Yeah, this is kind of transcends into the next question, which is I like to ask a lot of people, because you see a lot of really smart people who are well accomplished. What, when people look in the mirror, what is something like that you might see on their reflection that they don't seem to be able to see in themselves in that mirror? What do you think that they're overlooking, that, or they're either ignoring, or what do you think that is?
So I'm gonna spin this a little bit different. I was recently running an event with 30 of the top business leaders in the world, right? Like all running businesses, over $5 million up to, I think one of the guys had like a $500 million company there. Okay. And we asked the room, who in here struggles with imposter experience? Mm-hmm. Like today's going to be the day they figure out I'm not as smart, I'm not as successful, And out of those 30 people, how many hands went up that they struggle with imposter experience, Trent?
My guess is all 30. Did you get that, Gordie?
Exactly.
Yep.
Every single hand went up. And so back to your question, like we all struggle to see, 30. So we all struggle to see our own greatness. Like, and a different way is like what we're world class at, we think everyone can do. Like, I think everyone can connect. That's easy.
We know that's not, well, we probably know in theory that that's true, that everyone could do it, but we also know that it's very intentional and a lot of work and a lot of distraction and a lot of temptation and a lot of pulling us a lot of different directions. So while it is what you said earlier, simple, it's not easy, right? It's simple. Like, hey, just put your phone down and connect, right? Like engage in the conversation. But if it were that easy, we'd all be doing it, and we're not doing it. You copy me okay?
And that, like, sometimes the easiest things are the most difficult things. And how do we, I think as a society, and maybe COVID has been a bit of a reset, is what is really important? And what, if we're doing all these things, is it really important? Is it essential? Back to the Pareto's principle, right? Like, who are the 20% of your clients that drive 80% of your revenue? What are 20% of the activities that drive 80% of your revenue? And how to, like I look at social media, like I've gotten a couple of clients from social media, but like, it's not like when I was doing a lot of speeches, that wasn't how I was getting speeches. Like I was getting speeches because I was reaching out to people like you. And I was like, hey, will you introduce me to EO Chicago Learning Chair? Okay, yeah, cool. Yeah. It wasn't what I posted on Facebook. It was relationships.
Referral. That's so good. What do you think? I mean, you've had a lot of success, Gordie. You've also had a lot of challenges. What's the best battle that you've conquered in your lifetime?
That's an easy one. Next question. Just sobriety, the addiction piece, right? Like now 11 years clean and sober, and maybe not all the successes in my life, because I had some successes before I started using drugs. But everything goes back to that decision, right? Like working with billionaires, knowing cool people like you, it all comes back to my sobriety.
Okay. And did you go through like a 12-step program to rehabilitate? Did you do anything different that was not normal, not the normal way?
Nothing really about me is normal. So I went to a treatment center.
I love about you.
I went to a treatment center in San Francisco that, so like when I went to, so it's kind of like it's almost like a two-prong. I had like decided not to use drugs, but then I started struggling with mental health. And so I was taking some antipsychotics. So I went to a treatment facility to get off of those medications. And so it wasn't 12 based. I personally don't resonate with 12 step. It only has about a 10% success rate. So,
Wow.
I like stacking the odds in my favor a little bit more. And that being said, like it's helped millions of people get sober. But also a lot of people haven't gotten sober with it. You impacted enough lives. So my recovery program was kind of like throw everything at the wall and see what works and doesn't. And for me, like even now I spend 2 hours a day working on my recovery, right? And we could label that as personal development. We could label that as exercise, meditation, mindfulness. So I had a very unconventional, but one of the aspects that I really love is Gabor Mate talks about this, is like the question we're asking is why the addiction, when the question we should be asking is why the pain. And so how do we go in and deal with that pain? And how do we process that? Which, I don't know, it's a journey I'm still on, right? Like it's part of why I came to Peru, to continue walking home and continue going within.
Does the pain always precede the addiction?
I haven't thought about it from that perspective. And so like, I think you could change the word pain with trauma.
Okay.
But I would say, from my experience, there is some kind of pain or trauma, and we don't know how to deal with that. We don't know how to change the way that we feel. So we turn to these substances that make us feel a little bit better.
Yep.
Right? Like whether it's social media addiction, whether it's alcoholism, drugs, just
Netflix,
feel a little different.
Yeah. Well, and when I look at the friends that I know, and I think there's very few people who I haven't seen in my life deal some level of addiction, whether it's food, work. I mean, work's a common addiction that almost gets praised in our society, right? And it's a mask of some pain of regret. I find the pain of regret is very chronic, and I think about professional sports and someone who finally got that 1% opportunity to have a pro contract and the chance and really kind of mucked it up, right? And it's that woulda, coulda, shoulda pain of regret that I wish I would have done something different. And that pain becomes so strong that the addiction just numbs it for a while, right? Whatever the addiction they choose, it numbs that pain for a short period. The problem is you still wake up with me, like I'm still back with me again, and I still have the pain. So when until my next time I can numb it again? Because it turns out the pain's kind of follows me. I don't run from it, and my only chance is to numb it, right? So it doesn't work like I'd hoped it would, and yet the cycle begins and ends and then begins again, and it just kind of dog chasing the tail, right?
Yeah, as a lot of this conversation is how do we become best friends with ourselves, right? And how do we be the advocate for ourselves? And this, I got this lesson during COVID. Is I did a 3-day water fast and silent retreat at the same time. So basically 3 days, not talking and not eating. And my biggest takeaway from it is like, shit, I got to be best friends with myself. Like, I'm not getting, like, this voice isn't going to go away.
Yeah.
And I can either use that voice to be an advocate for myself, or I can use it to destroy myself. And even like, and knowing this and practicing this are two drastically different things.
Yes.
And so how do we use it to our advantage? How do I love myself? How do I connect with myself? How do I, if something is going wrong or not the way I want, how do I change? And that is what we call life.
I love it. Awesome, Gordie. Share again your social media real quick.
Yeah, so it's Gordon Bufton, or email is gb@geniuscreators.org. But yeah, I'd love, hit me up what you liked from this conversation, what you didn't like from this conversation. If you're using technology a little bit less, and just really, remember how to connect.
Yeah. Love that. I had a couple great things, like in my notes here, the average of the 5 people you spend time with, right? Past is, being lost in the past will create depression, and the anxiety is lost in the future. Um, the deep connection, and I know what we have to do really is all get your book, right? That's what we have to get is the connection effect. Hold that up for us again. The connection effect, like being present, being genuine, actually caring for others. And I know that's so part of a program, that's usually part of almost all addiction, is that generosity and connecting and caring for others, not about me all the time, and developing that, and then creating that stretch vision, that 10x. And what do we really want? That stretch of moving something from like 80 to 20 hours. And how do you do that? Because it looks totally different. You're going to have to think in a different way. And then, of course, why the pain? I love that question. Why the pain? Where is the pain from? And really diving into that. And then finally, being best friends with yourself. Just all really high quality advice for everyone out there. Follow the show on YouTube Live, LinkedIn Live, Facebook Live. We also have our podcast on all major networks: Apple, Spotify, Google Cast, all of the good ones, all the great ones. So whatever medium you're using, please follow us at the Leadershipity channel on YouTube. I am at Leadershipity, or Trent M. Clark on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. LinkedIn's probably our biggest handle and exposure. And of course, we are at leadershipity.com. Make sure that you look for our upcoming book, The Pyramid of Leadershipity: Accountability for Leaders. Super excited about this project. DM or email me about this show. Anything you want me to connect you to Gordie, happy to do it. Let me know what you think about this show. Please rate Winners Find a Way 5 stars. We work hard to find value delivering stories from the top 1%, like Gordie just delivered with great stuff. Lastly, we're going to finish, Gordie, with do you have a go-to verse or quote or something when things are challenging for you? Do you have something like that kind of verse, that kind of a quote that kind of regulates you right away, like that sets you back into level ground and can balance you? Do you have something like that?
I first read it when I was 16 years old it was like before school. It was actually a leadership council. Be the change you wish to see in the world.
I love that. Be the change you wish to see in the world. Man, that's profound. So every week on our show, I like to consider the guest that's coming on, and I pray about this during the week, and I get excited about who's coming in. And I was led this week to, I'm a Bible reader, I'm a Christian guy, and I was led to Proverbs 22 to 24 in what they call the 30 sayings of the wise. And man, this jumped out at me. Proverbs 23, saying number 12, or 23:12. It says, apply your heart to instruction and your ears to words of knowledge. And I mean, I just thought of you. I just thought, man, that's Gordie. He's applied his heart to this instruction. He instructs others. He's always learning. He's sponging. His ears are open to the words of knowledge. And yet you have customers that their ears are open to your words of knowledge. And I just thought, man, that's so prevalent for what I always think of when I think about our relationship and our time together. I'm honored to call you friend, Gordie. It's been a cool time over the last 5-6 years, getting to know you even better. And we met in a cool way, halfway across the world. And so I'm really blessed and thankful. And we've seen some crazy things in our relationship, right? Like partners passing. I mean, some really bizarre things. And I think it's only furthered our relationship and authenticated the fact that challenges exist, and we got to go through these things and we do them better together. So I'm thankful.
Yeah, it's been fun. Super grateful for you, how you show up in the world, how you show up in my life. I always know I could call you and get a little bit of inspiration just by how enthusiastic you are about life.
Love it.
We need more people like that. So.
Thank you. For everybody else, please join us next week, every Friday, 12:30 Eastern, 9:30 a.m. Pacific, on the Winners Find a Way show. Broadcast on all the networks. Look for our Winners Find a Way show podcast on all the major networks. Please rate us 5-star, like us, subscribe us, and we'll see you next time on the Winners Find a Way show.